Hi, this is Ed Fitzpatrick. If you enjoy local politics as much as I do, be sure to join our friends at Rhode Island PBS for the show A Lively Experiment. Hosted by Jim Hummel, the weekly series features journalists, pundits, and politicians debating the stories and issues that matter most to us Rhode Islanders. Tune in to A Lively Experiment and be part of the conversation. Fridays at 7 p.m. on Rhode Island PBS and wherever you get your podcasts.
From the Boston Globe, this is Rhode Island Report. I'm Steph Machado, in for Ed Fitzpatrick. Welcome back to the podcast where we bring you big conversations from our very small state. Winter is here, and thousands of Rhode Islanders are experiencing homelessness, and there is not enough shelter for all of them. The state's largest provider of housing for homeless individuals thinks building apartments, not opening more shelters, is the answer. We sat down with Michelle Wilcox, the president and CEO of Crossroads, Rhode Island, to hear about the plans. Michelle, thank you so much for sitting down with me.
Thank you.
You have been president and CEO of Crossroads, Rhode Island for about 6 months now, but you've worked here for a very long time. So tell me, what is your vision for Crossroads sort of in the immediate and then also in the long term?
Yes, I have been incredibly fortunate to be part of Crossroads for just over 31 years now. I was just thrilled when the board offered me the opportunity to take the CEO role. It's really the culmination for me of my career so far. Crossroads is an incredible organization. Our team, the people that work here, are doing really life-changing and life-saving work in many cases. We really are making a huge impact on the state and for so many of our neighbors in need. So the immediate plans really are, we have a very ambitious and exciting housing development plan in place. We are under construction right now for the Summer Street apartments. It's 176 one-bedroom apartments that's slated to be completed next year. We have a first of its kind in Rhode Island health and housing facility at 371 Pine Street that's going to begin construction very shortly within the next couple of months. So we have about 300 new apartments that are in the immediate pipeline.
So the big plan right now is build, build, build. You're trying to get more beds, more apartments up and running so you can house more people. How many individuals roughly is Crossroads housing right now?
So between our permanent supportive apartments, we have 375 permanent apartments throughout the state, and that serves individuals and families. We have about 1,200 folks that live in those 375 units. We also have about between 100 and 120 apartments that are rented from private market landlords that we support with rental assistance as well. So, another 400 or so folks there. We're serving a lot of people in housing. We also, of course, provide emergency shelter because emergency shelter is absolutely a necessary part of the solution to address homelessness. But permanent housing is the only solution, the only real solution to homelessness. And so that's where we focus.
So between the permanent housing and the shelters, you have the capacity to serve roughly 2,000 people at a time. How does that compare to the total need in Rhode Island? Are we really crunched? Are there fewer beds available than individuals experiencing homelessness?
Yes. The number of people experiencing homelessness in Rhode Island has really skyrocketed since the pandemic. So the number of folks that have experienced homelessness in Rhode Island this year is probably about 7,000, and that's double what it was in 2019. Annually, Crossroads serves about 4,000 people. So of those 7,000, we're going to, serve about 4,000 of them this year. And the need is great and growing, unfortunately. The homelessness crisis in our state, but also everywhere in the country, has really gotten so much worse since the onset of the pandemic.
What are some of the factors that have led that to continue? Because it has been a few years since at least the acute crisis of the pandemic.
I mean, we know that inflation, rising costs of everything, the shortage of affordable housing, the shortage of available housing, and wages that really just aren't keeping up with costs are really the factors that have driven people to experience homelessness.
And how full are your shelters? Is there a wait every day for people to get in, or could individuals, where we are here near downtown Providence, there's a lot of individuals sleeping on the street. Would they be able to get into one of your shelters tonight?
So unfortunately, the shelters across the state are always full. There are waits for shelter. That's why one of the programs that we operate is called Housing Problem Solving, and it's why it's so critically important. Housing problem solving helps folks who are experiencing homelessness maybe skip that shelter and go directly to housing. It's a conversation that happens between one of our case management housing problem solving staff and a household or person experiencing homelessness, and really tries to be creative in figuring out what can we do right now to solve your housing crisis, to solve your homelessness. It's an incredibly effective program. On average, we have about $2,400 per household is used in housing problem solving to end their homelessness. And the fact is, the vast majority of people who we house will never become homeless again. So emergency shelter is absolutely a necessary piece of the overall solution, but other programs like housing problem solving, and frankly, an unrelenting focus on building more affordable housing is all of those things are needed to solve the problem.
I think a lot of people think of Crossroads as a shelter system, but as you just said, the majority of the people you're housing are in apartments. Mm-hmm. And here in the tower, as it's known colloquially, that people will recognize, you can see it from the highway, you're doing a big construction project. Tell me about that.
The Summer Street Apartments is the project that's underway right now. It's about halfway done. We'll complete construction in September of next year. Summer Street Apartments is a 5-story, 176 apartment building, 1-bedroom apartments. And it is being built to replace the rooms that are in the Travelers Aid housing, the tower. The Travelers Aid housing was formerly the YMCA, and so there are 176 9-by-11 rooms. There are no kitchens. There's no, recreation or living space. It's shared bathrooms. So Summer Street Apartments is really exciting because everyone who's living in the Travelers Aid housing, when Summer Street is complete, will move in. They'll have a complete 1-bedroom apartment. And then that will enable us to undertake a renovation of the Travelers Aid housing, turning those 176 rooms into about 80 new apartments.
That concept of these single-room occupancy buildings, they seem to be going away. I know it's generally an inexpensive way to house people because, as you say, they don't have kitchens and bathrooms in every unit. But do you think that model of single-room occupancy housing is sort of over?
Absolutely. It's not how anyone should live. And in fact, during the pandemic, I'm so grateful that we did not have really significant loss of life. When you think about people living in those close quarters and some of the really terrible outcomes that happened in other congregate living situations, think nursing homes and places like that, where you have that many people so closely living together. It's not a good solution for permanent housing, especially when you think about the folks that we're serving. Many of the people that we serve have pretty significant mental health concerns, often substance use challenges, other health conditions. And so having their own apartment where they can prepare meals for themselves and can really have the space that we all have in our homes is really important.
So is the idea for them to eventually get out of the Crossroads owned apartments, or can they live there indefinitely?
It really depends on the individual. Permanent housing is just that. Folks can stay permanently. For some individuals, households, families, they may stay with us for a period of time, a number of years, and then their situation changes. They no longer have the need for the wraparound services and supports, and so they will go live in other housing. For some of our clients, though, or residents, they may stay with us for their whole lives, and that's okay.
I want to ask you about a project that is not a Crossroads project, but the pallet shelters that were supposed to open in Providence. The idea was that these were going to be sort of rapid housing that you could deploy, but they were supposed to open in March. And here we are in December, and there have been permitting issues and fire code issues, and they're still not open. Is too much red tape to get help for homeless individuals in Rhode Island?
I really can't comment on the specifics of that program. It's not something that Crossroads is directly involved in. But I will say that it can be challenging when government dollars are involved because there's another level of regulation that I think happens. Rightly so. We want to make sure that public dollars are being spent properly and wisely, but sometimes it does add a layer of complexity that you wish wasn't there.
I guess, do you experience any similar frustration? You're trying to get as many apartments or beds online as possible to help this population. Winter is coming, that, there's people sleeping outside. Do you experience any frustration with the pace?
I always wish things would move faster, absolutely. But also recognize that we have to do things the right way. We have to make sure that the buildings that we build are safe and will be sustainable and affordable for the long term, right? We want to make sure that if we cut corners at the front end, that doesn't serve us well 5, 10, 15 years out. So while it can be frustrating, and I certainly, we wish things could move faster sometimes, the reality is Summer Street Apartments, this very substantial building, is being constructed, from start to finish in just under 2 years. That's what you would see in the private market as well.
We'll have more with Michelle Wilcox after a quick break.
When you want to go beyond the headlines, let me recommend Rhode Island PBS Weekly. Rhode Island PBS Weekly is an award-winning news magazine broadcast that gives you the full story, powered by investigative journalism and narrative storytelling. New episodes of Rhode Island PBS Weekly drop Sundays at 7:30 p.m. on Rhode Island PBS. Watch past episodes at ripbs.org/weekly. That's ripbs.org/weekly.
How is Crossroads doing financially? Are you in good shape? Are you getting most of your money from state and federal sources, or is it mostly from philanthropic dollars?
So the majority of our funds come through public sources, grants, contracts, things of that nature. And then the balance comes through philanthropy, individual donors, fundraising events, and rents and fees. So the people who live in the housing that we own and operate, everyone pays rent. The trick and the key there is that they don't pay more than 30% of their income, regardless of what their income is.
Okay, so if they have no income, they pay nothing?
If they have no income, they pay nothing. Some of the funding sources and regulations require that there's always a minimum rent, but that's very nominal amount, $25 a month, for example.
Are you worried at all about the government funding that you get, both with the new presidential administration coming in, also on the state side? They're certainly not as flush as they were during the past few years with all the federal COVID relief money coming in. Do you have any concerns?
I can't speculate on what's going to happen with federal funding. We certainly know, we have a good indicator of what the state budget situation will be. The COVID relief funds, it's not a surprise that those are coming to an end, right? We knew that was happening. And they served a really important purpose to help us address the incredible increased need that we were experiencing during COVID. That said, because the numbers of homelessness have gone up so much and we're still dealing with that, it is a concern that there are going to be the resources to be able to address the need. But I think we did a really good job in planning for kind of the end of the COVID funds, using them in the best way possible, which was focused on construction and adding, more housing, because that really is the solution to the problem. I'm really hopeful that we're going to see the numbers of people experiencing homelessness begin to trend down as the new housing that we're building and developing comes online. That said, every year, Crossroads, we start from scratch in terms of our fundraising and making sure that we have the funds available to support the work. And as the need grows, we need the funding and the support to grow with it.
And I have to ask you sort of the awkward money question, which is that we always hear from frontline workers and advocates that nonprofit executives make quite a lot of money when they're sort of asking the public and taxpayers to put their money towards these good causes. Can you, defend a little bit the executive pay here at Crossroads?
Sure. Crossroads is a complicated organization, and we have millions of dollars of assets and programs and services that we operate. To suggest that because we are a not-for-profit organization, that the staff and team should not be compensated at the appropriate levels is just, that's not fair or appropriate. Nonprofit, for-profit, you're paying for the competency, the professionalism, and the responsibility that comes with the job.
I want to get your take on sort of some housing policy issues. First of all, do you think we need more public housing in Rhode Island?
Well, when you say public housing, so housing that is owned and operated by the municipalities.
A public housing authority,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. When you think about how long a person may be on a waiting list for public housing, and we know we have a disconnect between the number of people who are eligible and who would be appropriate to live in publicly subsidized housing and the number of available units. So absolutely, if our housing authorities could create more, that would be a benefit to the state overall.
There was a story recently in Johnston. There's a 250-unit affordable housing development proposed, and a planning department member said, "This project is the future Chad Brown of Johnston." And that was him opposing the project. Mm-hmm. Of course, Chad Brown, the well-known public housing community in Providence. How do we break this stigma that having affordable housing in your community is somehow a bad thing?
Yeah, it's a great question, Steph. I think people don't often realize that affordable housing is something that they may have benefited from at a point in their lives, or that their neighbors or their children or, their coworkers or the person who, is serving them their coffee in the morning. Affordable housing, public housing is not today what it was 30 or 40 years ago. We have learned a lot in the business of housing and creating housing that is attractive, that is suitable, it's safe. While sometimes large developments are certainly much more cost effective, Crossroads owns and operates housing throughout the city of Providence that you would never know is Crossroads and would never know it's affordable housing, right? So I think helping folks to understand who the folks are that are going to live in this housing, and that it's your neighbors, it's your friends, it's people just like me and you.
What do you make of the sort of new-ish housing department that's had a bunch of missteps that have been well reported, is now on its third secretary in 2 years? Do you think that this experiment, I guess, has been successful so far? We were absolute advocates for creating a housing department and a housing secretary. Having someone at the cabinet level whose focus is on housing and by extension homelessness is incredibly important. I'm looking forward to seeing what the new housing secretary is going to state for her vision and goals. We're here to support that work, and I'm hopeful that third time's the charm. And now that voters passed the $120 million housing bond this past election, rolling that out and getting those dollars on the street is going to be part of the housing secretary's scope. So looking forward to that.
I assume Crossroads will have the opportunity at some point to apply for some of that money. Do you have any spots picked out for additional apartment buildings?
The process is several years long, so we're always thinking about what will come next. And certainly when those dollars are available, I'm confident that we'll have a good proposal and project to put forward.
Michelle Wilcox, President and CEO of Crossroads, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you so much. This was great.
You can watch a version of this interview in the latest episode of Rhode Island PBS Weekly at ripbs.org/weekly. Rhode Island Report is a production of the Boston Globe in collaboration with Rhode Island PBS. Today's episode was produced by Megan Hall. Our music is from APM. Be sure to follow us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. I'm Steph Machado. Ed will be back on Thursday.
Looking to binge watch all your favorite PBS shows? You need Rhode Island PBS Passport. Masterpiece, Antiques Roadshow, Rhode Island PBS Weekly, and many more. Watch them all, anytime, and from any streaming device. Learn more about this member benefit at ripbs.org/passport. That's RIP